Hello, and welcome to another episode of Get Your Fill Financial Independence and Long Life, where we explore ways to achieve those two goals. And that's why I'm really excited to introduce you today to Daniel Sih. He is a productivity consultant, leadership coach, and professional speaker. He's in Hobart, Australia, and he's written a new book called Spacemaker: How to Unplug, Unwind, and Think Clearly in the Digital Age. And I don't know about you, but I have really I'm up to here with digital since COVID. I feel like I just only talk to everybody's, avatar. And that book, excitingly, has won the personal development book in Australia last year in the Australian Business Book Awards. And it was the finalist for Best Technology Book. Plus, it got Best Cover Design. So you have to check out the cover. And the best way to do that is to buy the book. Daniel is also the creator of productivity courses like Email Ninja, which I need because I am bombarded with email every day, and List Assassin and Priority Samurai. I see a theme developing here, Daniel. He has
Yes,
more
yeah,
than
ninja
20,000
themes.
students globally. He's married with 3 kids, and he finds time because he does these productivity things to mountain bike, and he loves the Tasmanian bushy, which sounds better when you say it with an Australian accent. Daniel, thanks so much for being with us today. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to having a conversation.
Yeah. So, Daniel, I know the answer to this, but like, why do we want more space? Why do we want to get rid of some of our email and, lists and blah, blah?
Yeah, look, I mean, you're right. We know the answer to this question, don't we? But it's intuitive. It's not necessarily straight out there. I mean, I just think space is really precious. And in the digital age, we're losing our capacity to think deeply and to rest fully and to just maybe relate with loved ones away from a screen. Even I had a number of weeks of silence last year, which is really unusual. It was part of a long service leave. And at first, it was really hard to turn off my technology and to slow down. But by the end of it, I remember just looking at a tree and enjoying the eucalypts, the eucalypt moving and just seeing the sounds and experiencing the smells and just delighting in simple things like a walk on the beach or enjoying a meal. And I was cooking for myself, so they were pretty bad meals. But I was eating some really simple meals and just delighting in every bite. There's a thankfulness that comes from slowing down and making space. And yet you don't get that when you run to stand still. So I feel like we should invest in space, and yet it eludes us. We can't find space in this post-COVID, remote working, always online age, unless we rethink our relationship with the online world and our digital habits. And unless we, invest in a broader range of activities that actually bring us, from a research perspective, much more joy and happiness, strengthen our relationships, increase our life, and allow us to focus on what matters most. So we should invest in space. That's why I want everyone to become a space maker.
Isn't that a brand of appliances or something as well?
Yeah. I must admit, I originally started with our company name, Spacemakers, and people said that sounds a bit like a furniture company, and which it actually is as well, apparently. But it's definitely our heart to help busy people make space and to reduce the clutter in their life. But from a mental and productivity perspective, not just furniture. Although it's good to clean your house.
Minimalism is good. But Daniel, I think everybody would probably agree. I don't think there's anybody out there who says, I just wish I would get some more emails, or for just as an example. But, like I feel like that's this morning. For a few days this week, I was really busy. And so I just just kind of like scrolled through my email and tried to pick out the important ones. But then they start really piling up and you're like, there could be something really important out there. I mean, how do you just like feel like you're doing your job well still? Like, I'm a real estate agent, I have to know if people are trying to communicate with me, but at the same time not like spend your life cleaning your inbox.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a total believer that technology is valuable and useful. I mean, I have a digital business. I'm podcasting. I'm speaking with you, and you're in America, and I'm in Australia. And this is what I do. So I love using tech, and I love the opportunities that is given me. Even email, there's some great value in it. But the key is to create patterns where we are independent from our digital tools, and that requires two sets of skills. Actually, it requires what I call habits of pace and habits of space. So the habits of pace we know about, and they're the kind of courses that you mentioned. How do you get your inbox to zero? I'm happy to give some tips if you actually need some, but how do you get your inbox to zero? How do you use online to-do lists and manage a calendar and prioritize and, use WordPress and all the other kind of technical things that we need to use in our day-to-day lives, because you need to use technology well and have those pace habits, those pace setting habits
Yeah.
to thrive in today's world. And if you have them, then you'll be more efficient and more able to do the things that matter most. But at the same time, you need what I call space making habits, which are about disconnecting from technology in a very deliberate and habitual way, with annual rhythms and weekly rhythms and daily rhythms, so that we can actually disconnect and be healthier and happier. So imagine it graphed, like if you graphed productivity against digital technology, imagine it being an upside down U, like a typical curve. And you need tech to make you productive to start with. But if you keep using it all the time, reaching for your phone first thing at night, last thing at night, first thing in the morning, and just continue spending more and more and more time online, you get this plateau where you reach this productive middle where more tech doesn't make you more productive. And if you keep going, and this is what our whole culture has done post-COVID, you end up in digital overuse, and you're wired and you're tired. Your inbox is out of control. You feel like you're never offline. You get Zoom fatigue. You just have this uncomfortable sense that you're on your screens too much, or you're becoming habitually addicted to swiping that phone, and it's not great for our health. And so you slide down the wrong side of that curve, and the space making habits return us to the productive middle. Does that make sense? So I think there's a
Oh, yeah,
sense where we
absolutely.
need to both be getting better at tech and at the same time be getting better at not using tech. And they're
Yeah.
both skills, but we don't think of not using tech as a skill. But the reality is nowadays, for many of us, particularly younger people, but I think it's for increasingly for all of us post-COVID, learning to not use technology is absolutely a skill. And I call it making space.
So when you're thinking about that, I mean, how much time in the day do you think we like ideally, not counting like sleeping time, that we ideally should just not even remember that we have an electronic device at our disposal?
Oh, so you're suggesting we should sleep nowadays? That's quite
Right.
novel. That sounds good.
I'm kind of a radical.
That is radical. What a waste of time. Oh my goodness. You sleep in America? No. Um, sorry, I'm being ridiculous. How much time should we spend online? Look, there isn't really research like for adults that can clearly say this is good and this is bad. It definitely depends on your role and your context, your personality, and also the types of things you should be doing. But I do go back to the iGen research that Jean Twenge came up with in the US. She looked at 4 of the largest longitudinal generational studies in the US, looking at young people born in that iGen generation. So basically, after Steve Jobs released the iPhone, until for the next 10 years, and what she found is that in almost every circumstance, more use of digital technology, so more screen time, led to increased unhappiness, and less screen time led to more happiness, which is a fascinating study. These are large longitudinal studies. And not only that, she found that young people who spend more than 3 hours on new media, so iPhones, iPads, that's kind of YouTube, social media, the kind of the scrolling and swiping active screen technologies rather than the passive ones where you sit and watch like Netflix.
Yeah.
More than 3 hours led to at least an increase of one of the suicide risk factors.
Wow.
So basically, increase your suicide risks, reduce your happiness, increase depression. And the reason is, I think, twofold. And this relates to adults, so it does relate to your question. On the one hand, there's something particular about the apps and habits and behaviors that younger people, but I think all of us are engaging in around, let's say, social media and some of the technologies which are really social and interactive, or even online pornography is another one that really damages mental health. But on the other hand, it's not just what we're doing with our time, it's what we're trading our time for, because statistically, spending time with people, like having a warm-bodied relationship, having a coffee with a person, or investing in silence and solitude, or reading a physical book, or exercising without a podcast or music in your ears, maybe taking up a craft or learning an instrument. Like, all those type of activities have been significantly reduced since we've increased our digital tech, because we, like you said, we have to sleep, and apart from sleep we have finite activity, right? We have a minimum amount, we have a finite amount of time where we can live. So if we're spending on average in America 9 to 12 hours on a screen every day, where does that come from?
Yeah.
It comes from the activities that statistically make us really happy and healthy and whole.
Yeah.
And we're replacing them with digital time, which at best is neutral, but many of the activities make us less happy and whole. And so the trade-off is the problem. Rule of thumb, I reckon if you're spending more than about an hour or two a day, on kind of the mindless entertainment-based screen stuff, I reckon that as an adult is going to have the same type of negative outcomes as you see it in young people, because you're trading it for something that could be much more life-giving. It's what you're losing. It's not what you're spending your time on.
So Daniel, when you're
Does that
working
make
with
sense?
people
Yeah.
and helping them to find this space, do you feel that when they first start to limit their screen time, that they're just like, what should I do? What should I do? Like, they're just like, completely goalless, or not goalless, but do you know what I mean? Like, that they're just kind of stressed out about the fact that they don't have something they can just pick up and start entertaining themselves with.
Yeah, look, there's definitely a dopamine, withdrawal that occurs. I mean, even with email, it's interesting. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we release in our brain. It's a goal-setting drug. So, imagine you're in caveman days and you're trying to get to to a safe place on the mountain from saber-toothed tigers. And you're walking and you look up, and then you walk for an hour and you look up and you realize you're closer to the mountain. And so your brain releases dopamine to encourage you to keep going. But it gets out of control with addictions like drug abuse, alcoholism, and poking machines. But you also reduce dopamine, let's say, with email notifications and with Facebook notifications. So there is definitely this wiring that occurs where we need it and we want it. But that said, it's not alcohol, or heavier drugs, obviously.
Not to
And
say that people don't drive badly when they're doing it.
yeah. We shouldn't drive. Yeah. I'd rather be drunk and drive. No, I shouldn't say that. But so the thing is that I get different responses to answer your question. People love it. Firstly, like when you turn off email notifications and say no more email notifications, for example, or get rid of the notifications on social media on your phone.
I can't stand that stuff. I
Yeah,
shut that off
it's
right
you.
away. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's usually a sigh of relief, and it actually feels good pretty quickly. But if you take a more mature approach and actually start to disconnect entirely from screens, let's say a day a week, or in the morning and night, so you're not starting and ending with a screen, or maybe having a digital free meal, those kind of practices, that it definitely takes practice, and it takes a radical paradigm shift actually to sustain those practices. And once you get over the hump of it becoming a discipline, and then it becomes a delight, but there's a bit of a hump where you have to change your heart and your head as well as your habits in order to just delight in space, because we're not used to it. So
Yeah.
but it's absolutely worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So Daniel, let's back up a little. I mean, how did you become interested in this
Yeah,
and
look,
being such a rebel?
I think it's hilarious. I mean, someone said the other day, so tell me if I'm correct. So you spend time on Zoom talking to people and getting paid to tell them to get off screens. I'm like, yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
Say, hang up right now, and then we'll know you succeeded.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How did it begin? Look, it probably began when I was in my early 30s. And I grabbed a phone, obviously, and I actually started to get near burnout. So I was working 3 jobs. I was a physiotherapist and managing a large health service. Physical therapist, I think you call them in the States. I was doing church ministry work with my local church, And then I'd started this entrepreneurial kind of business thing, which was called Spacemakers, but it was a hobby, but I really was passionate about it. And I was building a house. I had young kids, and it was just a lot of work. And I started to experience breathing difficulties when I was um, speaking, and then treating patients. And then I started to feel breathless when I was at the dinner table, and then even when I was reading books to my kids at night. And so I had all the tests, and look, there was nothing physically wrong. It was stress and anxiety,
Yeah.
and I had to radically rethink the way I lived and worked. And so that took me on a journey through mentoring and reflection of both downshifting, of making some hard choices at a large level, but also realizing that I didn't have healthy self-care habits and patterns in my life. And we are the result of our patterns. I mean, James Clear says we're the result of 100,000 choices, and so it's those habits and patterns of thinking deeply, of resting in a really intentional way, of investing in relationships, and I suppose putting time and space into things that really matter. They started to become more important to me, and I went on a journey to not be breathless, but more than that, to live more in line with my values, and more in line with what's just healthy for a human, I think. And so, and part of that was realizing that because my work is online, and because increasingly work is typing and swiping and communicating on a screen, well, then if I'm going to learn to deeply rest, I need to actually think about not doing those neurological patterns, because your brain can't tell the difference between Outlook and Instagram. If you're if you're swiping a screen with email at work, and then you're swiping a screen with social media for rest, well, your brain is never resting. And so I realized that I had to rethink my relationship with the online world as part of that journey to unwind and unplug and to create healthy patterns in my life. Because if I never turned off my tech, I would never turn off my brain. If I never turned off my brain, I would never really rest. And that was part of the problem. And so it led to this journey of discovering the research and recognizing the need to make space, and unplug as part of our experience of being fully human.
Absolutely. And there's even, you started to talk about, I think, the idea of, good sleep hygiene. If you're, on the screen right up until the minute that you go to sleep, you're not really restful. You're not having a good, restful, restorative sleep. Your brain needs some time to kind of calm down. And if you're not
Yeah.
sleeping, then everything seems more stressful. And right, it just becomes a real cycle.
Yeah, and look, we hear a lot about blue screens, and obviously, if you do screens right up to the time you try to sleep, then it's going to impact your melatonin and your ability to actually switch off and go to sleep. But I think there's another question around technology before we go to bed, which is just about how it shapes our mental health and our mind, our thought patterns.
Mhm.
So I mean, the I have a faith background, and so if you look at, let's say, Saint Ignatius, he always said we should start and end the day with deep reflection, so internal reflection about the data or the meaning of our day. Reflect on what's the high point and what's the low point, and just have a spiritual reflection on what the day has been, and then I imagine even reflect on what the day might be when you wake up,
Mhm.
or even just sit and enjoy. For me, it's enjoy God's presence, but at least you could enjoy meditating or reflecting, and just waking up with your own thoughts rather than someone else's thoughts. But that's not what most of us are doing. Most of us use the phone as an alarm clock. So we reach for it, and then we habitually open email, or open Facebook, or we open the news and we find out what's happening in the Ukraine. And that shapes the trajectory of our mind. We're filling our lives with other people's minds, with the agenda of of media, essentially,
Right.
or the agenda of our work colleagues or our bosses. And we don't have to start at 6 o'clock in the morning with other people's minds. We can start with our own mind. And
Right.
similarly, we can end the day by, God forbid, talking to the person in bed next to you and having pillow talk, rather than sitting there both playing Candy Crush and looking at Facebook. Do you know what I mean? It's there's it's we are becoming, in the words of Elon Musk, we're all becoming cyborgs. And uh, technology is great, but we need to have space where, yeah, mentally we have our own thoughts and we have our own convictions. We live our own life, not other people's lives. And
Right.
that requires some simple habit change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So how do you when someone first comes to you, first of all, is there any kind of similarity in the people who are seeking you out? Are they all sort of in a similar place and they're like, I am having a catastrophe or I'm really stressed out? Or is there any sort of a type, an
Yeah.
avatar that you have?
Yes. Yeah. Look, I mean, the majority of my clients are leaders, busy professionals, working mums and dads who have fairly high paced roles. And I do a lot of training and coaching. And most of my paid work is actually not around helping people unplug. It's helping people use tech well, like how to get your inbox to zero, because people will pay for the habits that look like work.
Yeah.
Uh, but actually, increasingly, what I'm finding is there's this really, really broad audience of people who are particularly post-COVID. They've not just Zoom fatigue, but just life fatigue, and there's this lack of wellness, this sense that I'm just tired,
Yeah.
and I'm tired of the changes. I'm exhausted by my life, and I know I'm unhappy, actually, if I'm really honest, with the habits I've developed, um, reaching for my phone just habitually wherever I am. And I know deep inside that there's something about that that's not good for me, but I can't quite put my finger on it.
Yeah.
And yet I know it does require a change in my thinking. And when I say to people that they have a relationship, like a real relationship with technology, and if they don't acknowledge that and work out what type of relationship they want, well, then it would just be codependent.
Yeah.
And so so that's a very large audience, and I find that that's where I've written the book too. Um,
And how do
yeah.
you start with them? Is it almost like, counseling?
Well, so the book goes from the paradigm to the principles to the practices. So that is my approach. So the idea of, I mean, I wrote a blog post years ago, like 7 years ago, why I turn off my phone once a week just to have a digital detox. And that was an unusual concept at the time. Like, digital detox is now a word, but no one had used that in Australia. From what I think I was one of the first bloggers who ever and I made it up, right? And so that was like the media came on board and said, "Oh, what a crazy idea, turning off your phone." Uh, and yet that has started to become, yeah, I suppose, normative. And the funny thing, when I think about it, when I coached clients, when I said, why don't you turn your phone off at the start and end of the day and charge your phones outside of your bedroom, right? Is it like, none of these are hard concepts. It's quite ridiculous that someone would pay me to tell them to charge their phone outside of their bedroom, if you really think about it, right? But while these aren't hard concepts, turn off your phone and just live a life that's not always on a screen, it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And why is it hard to do?
Because you
It's
think you're
hard
missing
to do.
something.
We think we're missing something. It's yeah, there are so many reasons it's hard to do. We have this deep relationship, this deep attachment to our devices. We have a worldview shaped by our culture that says that technology is good and only good, and that you need it to be healthy and productive and to keep up. Uh, we have neurological changes, so neuroplastic changes in our brain. If you were to practice, let's say, playing the piano for 9 to 12 hours a day, and you did it for 10 years, what type of piano player would you be? And what would your brain look like? It would change to make you an amazing musician, right?
Right, right.
We're all practicing the internet 9 to 12 hours a day. So it's changing us from the inside out. There's issues with digital power. There's issues with freedom and choice. There's challenges with our loves and longings. So I start the book by basically saying, unless we change our paradigm of technology, we're never going to be able to change our habits.
Yeah.
Because behavior, as my friend Jamin Fraser says, is behavior is at the end of the assembly line of our beliefs and our stories. And so if we don't change our tech story, we'll never be able to sustain behavior change. So the reason we can't turn off our phones is because we have the wrong story.
Yeah.
So I believe we need to deeply rethink our paradigm. Cal Newport has a similar approach in digital minimalism. He basically says we need to have we need to rethink our frameworks as well, from that kind of the ground up. So once we rethink our relationship with the online world, and I talk about all these social, cultural, neurophysiological issues, then we can actually say, what are the principles we want to shape our life around instead? So the positive principles, and for me, it's like real relationships, silence and solitude and spirituality, I talk about the deep value of creating something or having a craft or experiencing life offline. So once we know what not to do, then we know what to do, and then you finish with the practices. Yeah, let's charge our phone outside of our bedroom and have 10 or 20 minutes to start and end the day without a phone. But can you see why you need a journey?
Yeah.
Because it's just hard to sustain unless you truly deeply believe in that change, and if you truly invest in that space at a heart level.
Well, and I think too, um, I think ultimately, you're not like saying stop this, you're saying substitute this. So, if you just say to someone, don't do this, it's a little bit more difficult because then you have this time and the time is heavy. And what am I going to do with this time? I'm not getting these little, like you say, these little dopamine blips. So what am I going to
Yeah.
do? But if you substitute it and say, you're going to do, instead of being on your phone, you're going to learn to play guitar, then suddenly at least you have some. Do you know what I mean? I think that makes it a little bit easier for people if they can see the point. It's not like I'm going to go on a diet. I just can't eat all these foods. No, it's like, I look how much you're going to enjoy the flavor of these great, whatever. I mean, just the
Yeah.
idea of like a digital diet, right? Or a detox. We're like, oh,
Yeah.
what? I just have to drink water now for the next month. No, you can just, this is what you get in exchange, right? I think that's more of a,
Absolutely. And it's falling in love with what you can make when you have space. That again, from a spiritual perspective, if you look at the spiritual disciplines, they talk about going from discipline to delight, which means you have to fast, and also feast. So
mhm,
you'd fast, let's say it's Easter. I mean, I know that many Catholics are on Lent, so it's not just that you fast from food. I'm sure that the idea is that you're feasting on relationships and spiritual connection and other things. Do you know what I mean? So it is about trading one thing for the other, not just saying no. Yeah. And the other thing is I'm not saying no to technology. My assumption, and this is the audience I speak to, my assumption is that you're online almost constantly in some form or another. You're always connected.
right.
I'm actually just saying, let's have some spaces in our week, in our day, in our year where we intentionally do the opposite. It's almost not quite the same as a diet, because I'm not saying, I'm basically saying you're eating chocolate like every meal, every day. How about you have breakfast without chocolate? It's not even like real fasting. Do you know what I mean? It's
Right,
just like
exactly. You
the
still can eat,
assumption
but
is you're addicted. Let's just be a bit less addicted for some times in our life. And that really shouldn't be too hard. It shouldn't be a hard sell, but it is, but it shouldn't.
so that leads me to the next question. Like, how long does it typically take somebody to become sort of successfully, detoxed and to update their lifestyle with your skills, with the skills you're teaching them?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously
I
it should be a
conclude,
10-minute conversation, right?
well, I don't think that. So I believe that the battle that we have with space, and time, with busyness and overwork and distraction, I actually think this is something that you don't win. It's not something that, yeah, now I'm Zen, like I just have all this space and time, and there's no pressures and no work, and
I'm learning to
I'm always
levitate.
clear in my thoughts. But it is something that you build on, and you build habits and rhythms, and you become better at it. But then you fall back on it, or then you mature and you actually realize, actually, what I thought I need more of it. But I think for me, at least, and I conclude with this: the battle I've had with space and time, I think, is a spiritual battle, and it's one where the wrestles that I've had with learning to unplug and test my heart and test my habits, it's actually about testing my character and my values, and helping me understand who I am and who God is, and what my faith is about and what my life is about. And those questions don't ever get, then they're not solved necessarily, because as we change, we journey more deeply into our inner life. So unfortunately, I can't say, yeah, if you do this and this and this, you'll be cured. But what I do think is that if you enter the process of unplugging as a habit, you'll start to examine your inner life, and you'll start to know yourself more deeply, and you'll examine your values. And that is a very worthwhile process. And as you learn more about yourself and who you are, well, then you'll inevitably unplug more, and the journey continues.
Yeah. You
And I think
get
that's a
the reward
beautiful.
of not being online as opposed to the reward of being online, or its perceived reward.
You get the reward of being a human
Instead of a cyborg.
instead of a cyborg. Yeah, you really do. I mean, and there's something cool about being a cyborg. Look at Darth Vader, or I don't know, RoboCop or Terminator. I mean, they had power and they had some pretty cool things. Like, so it's kind of cool being a cyborg, but cyborgs aren't great at relationship, not deep relationships. Darth Vader really had a problem with his son. And they're not great at spirituality. They're not great at stillness. And I mean, I'd say that obviously tongue in cheek, but I think there's some beautiful things about being online, but there's just stuff that can only happen when you're a human. And let's recapture that.
Yeah, that's what we should call this episode, is, like, I don't know, something like kill the cyborg within, or something like that.
I am no longer how to become a human and not a cyborg.
And other useful skills.
And other useful skills.
That would be good. That's what we'll do. So what are some tips that we could do, like today? Let's say that we accept this, outlandish idea that we're online too much.
Yeah.
What could we potentially do, like today, that could help us to, deal with the idea of, like you say, like, okay, I'm going to not bring it in the bedroom. But then what if somebody calls me, right? What if I have children, and what if they need me in the middle of the night? I need to have it in my bed, right? How can you, like, what could we do today that would be like a really baby step to get us going in the right direction?
Yeah, no, it's great. Look, I will give you some very specific tips in a second, but I'd say the first thing is maybe do a digital audit, because again, it starts with awareness. And if we're not aware of what we currently do and what our behaviors say about our values, then I can just throw a tip at you and it won't necessarily work. Like I used to be a physiotherapist for more than a decade. And what I realized is there's all these great techniques for back pain, but if you don't diagnose the source of the pain, well, then I'm just throwing stuff at you randomly.
Right.
And so you need to take the time to examine the pathology and therefore the treatment becomes really obvious. And I think it's the same with technology and unplugging. So I'd start with a digital audit, which means just wake up, and you may want to document it in writing, or at least mentally record, what do I do when I wake up? Oh, I've just grabbed my phone. Yep. And actually, I pretty much always check email,
Well, so Dan, let me just interrupt you for 1 second, because I think some phones keep track of that for you, right? How many hours was I online? What apps was I on, right? You don't even necessarily have to keep a diary. You could look in your phone. Magical appliance would tell you, right? A lot of I mean, not every phone perhaps, but I think some of that is available, right?
Yeah, it'll tell you, from my understanding, it'll tell you the amount of time you've spent on different apps and screen time. I'm not sure it will show you. I'm thinking I want more of a linear tracking of what you actually do in a habitual way.
Yeah.
So what did I do before I cleaned my teeth, or before I had a shower, or before I had my morning coffee?
Yeah.
So I think the overarching screen time's useful as a tracking guide, but probably for the audit, it's actually what do I physically do, and what do I do habitually? That's what you want to pick up, because we are creatures of habit, and you have digital habits. They've been shaped by the shareholders of Silicon Valley tech companies, probably more than your intentionality. And so therefore, how do I make and become aware? And so for me, I mean, honestly, this is terrible, right? So I would reach for my phone, I would grab it, I would check email pretty much first thing. And I'd just delete a few things. And then I'd sit on the toilet and I'd look at the news. I'd realize, like, I've just spent 10 minutes on my phone before I even had a shower. Like, that's just not, it's not what I would have designed for my life.
Right.
And then in the shower, guess what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about what happened in work, or what the email was, or what's happening in the war in Europe. And so my whole day is already framed because of my screen. So for me, it was like, that's dumb. So now I spend 10 minutes just lying in bed, praying and thinking and being in God's presence, and then reflecting on the podcast I'm going to have a conversation with, or
looking
the
forward to
clients I'm going to meet.
Great conversation.
So I can think about, who is your audience, and how might I want to respond? That's a far better way to start the day. And I feel like I also, I think I heard an episode where one of the ladies on your podcast was saying they asked God what might they need to do today. I do that kind of thing as well, and let that change my day. So Obviously, I come from a faith perspective, but just to be silent and meditate and be quiet. I mean, to be still is beautiful if you can learn to enjoy your own thoughts. And so again, it's that's just the beginning of the day. But you'll find tech habits which are like, yeah, they're really useful habits, and these are positive and they help me achieve my goals. They align with my values, so they're great. You tick them off and say, I want to reinforce them and do more of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's just a negative audit; it's just an awareness audit. And
Yeah.
then from there, it's like, okay, if this and this habit aren't helpful for me, uh, maybe you might ask the question, what do those behaviors say about my values? And if I did them every day, what are the consequences over a lifetime?
Yeah.
Because that's that, and it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't make me the person I want to be, or the husband or father or wife, or so therefore, what might be a tweak, a small shift that I could do. Um, so that's where I would start. And then in my book, I have heaps of suggestions about typical shifts based on the research, which are really useful for us.
Yeah. Excellent. So the first thing people should do is order your book. Why don't you tell them how they should go
Of
about doing
course,
that?
of
Because no,
course.
it's really valuable. Yeah, I'm not just like blowing up your skirt here. I think it's a great thing, and everybody needs to do. So,
Yeah, and buy the physical book because I love the physical book. But
yeah.
no, there is an ebook and there is an audio book, and they're great. But
But you're not going to get the beautiful cover that was award winning.
the cover's beautiful. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on the cover.
There you go. And then now, so okay,
I'm happy to give tips as well. I don't want to just give principles, but yeah.
yeah, yeah. So what kinds of things do you think that what do you want people to know that we haven't touched on yet?
I think just to know that a very small amount of space can transform just your mental health and happiness. I think that the deep work is reflecting on your relationship with the online world, and why are you so compelled towards it, and what are the loves and longings of your heart that are satisfied by always being online. That's the hard work. But when you get to the stage of the practices, it's actually really simple. And a few tweaks that you do every day will exponentially change what you can do with your life. And so I think it's actually a really hopeful conversation. And actually the small habits that we have will actually recalibrate our neuroplasticity. So they'll recalibrate the changes in our brain. And so we'll be practicing making space rather than just practicing being online. And that all has a long-term consequence. And then our thinking changes and our habits change. So again, don't feel like you have to change everything, just change something small. And that can be really encouraging. And I've seen that work really well for people in terms of making success. Even if you have like a crazy life and lots of kids still, you're working your guts out, you can still, let's say, have, I don't know, lunch away from your screen where you walk around the block and just practice thankfulness. They don't have to be big practices. They just have to be changes that you do habitually.
It's funny you're saying taking a walk. So I live across the street from the beach, and every morning I take a walk on the beach. And I would say more than 50% of the people have something in their ears, and they're either listening to something, right? I mean, maybe that's like some motivational exercise thing, but you're not hearing the crash of the waves. You're not hearing the seagulls. You're not hearing you know what I mean? You're not engaged in the beauty that's all around you. I mean, to me, it's just like, why don't you just go to the gym? I mean, like, you're missing out on everything that's here. It's so beautiful. And like this morning, it was raining. Rain was lashing my hood, and it was like waves were crashing. It was fantastic. Of course, this morning I was out there alone because it was raining, but normally there are other people running or whatever. And they're just like, so often they just have their little earbuds in and they're just running around. It's just like, you're missing it. You're missing the good part.
You're missing it. Yeah, we went on a holiday, I remember, when I was 14 years old, to a place called Dunk Island. It is like paradise in Australia. It's this expensive, amazing island where everything is warm. It's just like perfect. Okay. And yet my dad had a new video camera, and this is in the 90s. And he videoed the entire thing. And I watched like 10 minutes of it like the other day It's the only time anyone's ever watched it. And it was kind of cool, but how much
Now,
do you really want to watch a
20,
view?
30 years
Yeah,
later, right?
yeah, exactly. But I'm like, but I think he missed the experience.
Yeah.
Like, he actually didn't get to do the parasailing or sit on the beach or enjoy the waves or just make a sandcastle with his kids because he videoed it. And I think that's actually a bit of an analogy of how we're living life.
Yeah.
Again, I love podcasts, I love learning, but if you don't have any time to reflect on the meaning of that for you, if you don't have time to then be present and be where you are,
Right.
you're like a cup that just continually fills, but you can never know what bit's yours and what bit's someone else's. And yeah, like you said, you just miss out. And so let's not do that. Let's take the podcast, enjoy what we learned today, and
Exactly.
then go for a walk and think, how does that apply to my life? What might I do about it? And let your own brain process this information before you put in the next idea and the next idea and the next idea.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have to process these things, and it's like, oh, I just learned that, but learning isn't the goal, right? It's the implementation, it's the change, it's the things that can happen because you heard that thing or learned that thing. So you just have to kind of like let your brain percolate with it, and until you can, embrace it and actually understand what it all means.
Absolutely. Yeah, wisdom is applying what you learn in your own life, in the context that you live in, and it's impossible to be wise without making space. You can have lots of knowledge,
Yeah.
but gee, we know a lot of people who know a lot and they're really nasty people. We know that, right? Or they're really broken people. They know heaps, but they just have no conviction in their soul, no peace,
Yeah.
no silence in their spirit. Wisdom requires that we take that information and we turn it into our life.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. I'm really excited. So tell people where they can buy the book. Where should they buy the
Yes.
hard copy so they can see the beautiful cover?
Yeah. So the best way to buy the hard physical copy is go onto the internet.
But
and
only
look
during
at
your dedicated screen time.
and look at an online store to learn how to not be online. I told you it's hypocritical, isn't it?
Right.
No, look, in the States, obviously Amazon's got it. I mean, my book should be on most good online stores. And actually, I've just started to promote to a US and Canadian audience. So I'd love reviews. If you like the book, feel free to share a review.
Yeah.
But I also have an audio book on Audible and obviously an ebook on Kindle. And if you're interested in things like how to start a weekly Sabbath, how to unplug, I have free videos and like how to action sheets on my website, which is Spacemakers, plural, spacemakers.com.au. AU's for Australia. So you can just sign up, get those sheets, read some free chapters if you're curious about knowing more. I'd love to connect. And we actually do train teams online. So I've got a training team in Canada, and through Zoom we can train you in digital wellness in a few hours, or we can train you in how to get your inbox to zero, or how to use an online to-do list and make priorities, even if you want to work out why we have this crazy name, Email Ninja. But feel free to contact us and lock in some training if interested.
Perfect. And I think, anybody, there are a few less, useful things you can do than play with your email. So if you can help a team to like get rid of their inbox, then they can do some actual work, whether it's online or not. Right?
I mean, it's incredible. The research from Harvard Business Review says that for the average knowledge worker, if you just get a 10% increase in your email efficiency, you can buy back 2 work weeks of lost time per year. And yet most people are never trained how to manage high volume email. They're just like, here's your inbox, good luck.
Yeah.
And so what else, like, is there any other area where you would get a person to work for maybe 3 hours a day on a particular work tool and not train them? We wouldn't do that. And so again, it's just learn the basics and take small steps.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Actually, you're right. I mean, nobody ever has trained me on, how to efficiently email or efficiently, not have gigantically full inbox all the time. So I mean, I unsubscribe all the time, and I have more crap than you can imagine. But
I bet
anyway,
it's
on every
it
list
is.
there is, I guess.
It's like that old game Tetris, which
Yeah.
actually is having a comeback. You know, like the more effective you are at it, the faster it becomes, and the more shapes kind of come your way until you lose. I think that's email. It really is. There comes a point where you need to actually just have a system where you say, "Yeah, this is enough,"
Yeah.
and these are the things I'll do. These are the things I won't do, and now I'm going to do something else with my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you need systems to have the confidence you can make those decisions well.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you, listener, for listening. If you take Daniel's advice and buy back some of your email time, even if nothing else, right? Two or three, was it 2 or 3 extra weeks a year? That's like unbelievable, right? You can use that for vacation. You can have a good time. Go around, walk around the block, go to the beach, have a good, enjoy your quality of life. And I know that you know somebody who spends way too much time online, even if it isn't you. So make sure that you share this episode with them and help them help them improve their life and their enjoyment and their, sense of being a human. Help them go back to being a human.
Not a cyborg.
Exactly. And not a cyborg. And make sure you come back next week.